All this equipment was purchased in the West Side Lumber Company from Yosemite, California, which is about 100 miles to the north of us. For the West Side Lumber Company, they were the largest logging company up here in the area. They were still logging throughout the early 1960s. For the Madera Sugar Pine Lumber Company, they started their business in 1899 till 1931. At 1931, they voluntarily closed down the operation due to the Great Depression years. Unfortunately, the Madera Sugar Pine scrapped up some of the buildings and also some of the trains from the mill site. We are coming along to a fire pole. Look across from the power pole. The furthest mountain out there is called Raymond Mountain. Raymond Mountain is an elevation of 8,500 feet. And the Madera Sugar Pine went to the very tippy top of the mountain there. And the Madera Sugar Pine clear cut the forest here about 30 or 35,000 acres. From the mill site and from here is about 2.5 miles away. You may have noticed a fire that happened here in the area. The fire happened on August 29, 2017. The cause of the fire is unknown, and the damage of the forest was about 12,400 acres. The fire lasted for about 3 to 4 weeks long. There are a few trees I like to talk about here in the area. Unfortunately, some of the trees are burned down here in the area that I would like to talk about. But the first tree I like to mention is called the instant cedar tree. You might see some, like around here in the area. Basically, the instant cedar tree has this natural black mold on the tree, and this natural black mold is a fungus from the tree. It doesn't seem to be harming the tree at all, so it's still actually healthy. Our next tree I'd like to mention is called the white fir tree. The white fir tree has a white bark on it. These white fir trees are also known as a Christmas tree. These only grow in the elevations of 4,000 to 6,000 feet high. They also have another cousin related called the red fir tree as well. They live in the lower elevations. Horseshoe Curve was dug out in 1908, and there was a group of workforce that came up. And after that, the workforce dug this whole curve out by hand, using pickaxe, shovels, wheelbarrows, and buckets, and also mules and donkeys to carry off the dirt. This whole curve took them almost a year to finish here. Also, Horseshoe Curve has some wild plants here I'd like to talk about. The first wild plant I'd like to mention is has a purplish color. This purple color is known as a lupin flower. Right next to the lupin flower, you see a pinkish colored flower there. And that pink color is called a foxglove. We also have some wild strawberries here in the area. They are very tasty in these parts of the mountains. But in this part of the railroad tracks, they're not so tasty due to the locomotive that comes by. A lot of oil and grease. The Madera Sugar Pine Lumber Company had 5 wood-burning shade locomotives. This is actually one of the 5 wood-burning shade locomotives. The only exception is that this one burns oil rather than wood. The shade was most popular of all-gear-driven locomotives. This one right here, it is a all-gear driven locomotive rather than a straight rod driven locomotive. The reason why they use the all-gear driven is to go on some of the steep grades and some of the sharp curves from the mountains. The shade was invented by a Michigan lumberman named Ephraim Shea. In about 1880, the Lima Locomotive Works in Lima, Ohio, started building the first of what would become that company's principal product and make them famous around the world. We have like 2 Shea locomotives here. The first shade locomotive that I would like to mention is the number 15. The number 15, this one right here that we're using right now, was built in 1913. It weighs about 54 tons, and after that, it could have about 60 gallons of oil and about 500 gallons of water. Our second steam train is called the number 10. The number 10 was built in 1928, and it is the largest shay ever built for the narrow gauge railroad. The number 10 weighs about 84 tons, and every time the number 10 does its 4-mile round trip tour, it uses about 40 gallons of fuel of oil and nearly about 400 gallons of water. While number 10 was still working in the logging business, it was capable of pulling about 20 loaded flat cars of timber to the mill site and comes back about 38 empty flat cars. A couple of pine trees I'd like to mention here in this forest. The first pine tree is called the sugar pine tree. The sugar pine tree has one of the world's largest pine cones. The pine cone can go to about like 1.5 feet long, and the needles on that tree could grow to about a cluster of 5, and it could grow to about like a ½ inch or so. And right next to the sugar pine tree has another cousin related called the ponderosa pine. The ponderosa pine tree has a similar pine cone such as the sugar pine, but it's not as long. The ponderosa pine is a little bit smaller. You might see some down below in the ground. And the needles on that pine tree could grow to a cluster of 5. I'm sorry, a cluster of 3. And that is measured to about like a 1.5 inches. Our next tree I'd like to talk about is called the California black oak. The California black oak has this flat green leaf on it, kind of similar to a maple leaf. The California black oak has this, it actually produces a acorn, and this acorn is a good food source for the Native Americans. The Native American uses the acorn to have a little bit of a protein snack. They grind them up into bits, dump them in the stream, and from there on have it like a snack. Looking on the right hand side, you see a roadbed. This roadbed was one of the main roadbeds that they used to go down to the mill site. You can still go down there and check out the area. Right now the mill site, unfortunately everything's all scrapped up, and right now it's only about a couple of buildings from the mill site and the pond where they usually put the logs inside. From the mill site from here, it's about like 2 miles down the hill. Looking at both sides of the railroad tracks here, you see this smooth red bark tree. This smooth red bark tree is known as a manzanita tree. Manzanita is a Spanish word for little apple, and this tree produces a small red berry. This small red berry is a good food source for the bears and deer, and for the Native Americans, they use the berries and the leaves from the tree to make a drink. The drink will be an actual cider drink. Also, looking at both sides of the track, you see this very thick green brush on both sides. It's like the very lower brush here. These are known as bear clovers. Bear clovers has this really strong smell that will last on your clothes for about a couple of days. For the people who actually worked up here from the mill site, they call this mountain misery. For the Native Americans, they actually use the oil to make a cure. The cure will either be a headache pain or a stomach pain. They boil it in some hot water, have it like a tea, but it's not as sweet. It has a little bit of a bitter taste to it. Also, berry clover has like similar ingredients such as a medicine called aspirin. These railroad tracks that you guys are riding on here are called narrow gauge tracks. Narrow gauge tracks measure to about 36 inches wide. Compared to the standard gauges are 56 and a half. For the Madera Sugar Pine Lumber Company, they had about 140 miles of railroad tracks, and at the time they only used about 15 to 20 miles. Right now we are using about a 4-mile round trip tour here, and it's still the original road beds like that. Basically they actually lumbered from the mill site and from this little curve here. We're about like a mile and a half away. The Madera Sugar Pine Lumber Company employed about 800 men. Certain men get paid differently. Such as the basic laborers, they get paid about 10 cents an hour. They work 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. Compared to the very skilled laborers, such as the carpenter and the lumberjack, they get paid differently. For the carpenter, they get paid about 30 cents an hour, and for the lumberjack, they get paid for the size of the trees and as many trees to bring down. Once the lumberjack cuts down a tree, it'll be sent to the train. From the train, it'll be hauled off to the mill site, and from the mill site, it'll be dumped off inside the pond. From that pond, it'll be gathered up inside the mill barn. From the mill barn, they'll be cut up into rough boards. From the rough boards, they'll be stacked up to about 14 inches high, and they'll be sent through a flume. A flume is a V-shaped trough that has water that goes inside of it. The Madera Sugar Pine built one of the longest flumes. It went to about 54 miles long. It went through the Fresno River, to the San Joaquin River, all the way down to the city called Madera. Madera is the Spanish word for wood, and that's where the lumber will be stationed at. For the Madera Sugar Pine Lumber Company, they didn't really have benefits. The only cool thing about it is that they actually nailed two boards together, and after that, from there on, they actually rode down the flume. The flume is about the top speed can go to about 35 to 40 miles per hour. And they usually go down there. There's actually like an original picture that they actually took a photo of them riding down the flume. This forest that you guys are seeing right now is still considered a young forest. As I said in the beginning of the tour, that the Madera Sugar Pine clear cut of the forest here about like 30 to 35,000 acres. All these natural trees and plants are from basically natural seeds, from the pine cones and from the flowers. All this is about 100 plus years old. This is still considered a young forest. Called Lewis Creek Canyon. Lewis Creek Canyon was one of the main waters from the mill site. And from Lewis Creek Canyon, this could be followed all the way down to that trail down below in Highway 41 called Lewis Creek. On this part of the tour, we'll be stationed here for about 10 to 15 minutes. You can walk around, take photos in front of the train, or even look inside the train. And also, you might see some of the pine cones I was mentioning, such as the sugar pine cone and the ponderosa pine cone.
Right? Perfect. It's not too bad because of the breeze.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Please watch your step.